Good afternoon. My name is Hassan Alzazi. I'm the chair of chemistry department at AUC. First, I would like to welcome President Ahmed Dalal to AUC, and I wish him well and congratulations for your appointment. This afternoon, I will be moderating the first panel on sustainability, global health, and human ecology. Before I start, I would like to ask our audience who are joining us via Zoom that if they have any question to put it in the chat, and we will try to answer these questions at the end of the presentations. This panel on sustainability, global health, and human ecology will be of great interest to most of you. I will give a few introductory slides before the essential speakers or the panelists in this panel. In 2015, the United Nations General Assembly has introduced the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, and almost all countries are trying to implement these 17 SDGs by the year 2030. One of the initiatives that are of great interest and that have been introduced is the net zero carbon emission, where measures to lower emission of greenhouse gases and measures to remove them from the environment should result in a net zero balance between the amount produced and removed from the greenhouse gases. And we can see that countries like UK, for example, will pledge to fulfill the SDGs by a certain year. I can see also countries, multinational like Amazon, IKEA, and other companies will pledge to achieve the SDGs by a certain year. Actually, in Saudi Arabia, only a couple of days ago, they initiated their Saudi Green Initiative. Several companies have developed technologies to help achieve these sustainable development goals, and some of these technologies probably will have their own shortcomings. The field of health and medicine has witnessed a major paradigm shift from traditional medicine, in which only a small group of patients will benefit from the intervention, to stratified medicine, where patients are grouped by several parameters, and patient groups will benefit from the treatment. And then finally, we have witnessed the introduction of precision medicine, where many factors will be considered in tailoring the treatment and the intervention per single patient, where each single patient will benefit from the individualized treatment. At the social front, health has witnessed another paradigm shift from health equality to health equity, and we'll hear a lot about this from Dr. Huda Rashad in her presentation. Then 2 years ago, as everyone knows, we have witnessed the emergence of the COVID-19 pandemic. And as of yesterday, we have over 242 million cases infected with COVID-19 and around 5 million deaths due to the pandemic, despite the introduction of over around 7 billion doses of vaccines. And then we are actually, this is a very interesting virus from the biological point of view, where several variants that are more effective in transmission and actually in their serious side effects, like Delta variant, and 2 days ago they are talking about Delta Plus. And these variants have been introduced in less than 2 years, which is kind of very interesting from the biological point of view. Not all the effects of the COVID-19 pandemic were negative. Actually, a major, something of interest that there has been a dramatic drop in pollution, and for example, you can see from these photos, drop in nitrogen dioxide levels in Wuhan, which is the epicenter of COVID-19 pandemic. You can see in a 3-month period, we have a dramatic drop in the level of nitrogen oxide levels in this state. On the other hand, several reports have indicated that all efforts to support the 17 Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations have been hampered because of the COVID-19 pandemic. So these are just few slides to get going and jumpstart our panel, and these will be the themes that will be covered by our three speakers: impact of COVID-19 on the challenges of SDGs, the gifts and challenges of technology in diagnostic, mitigation, and prevention, climate change, exposome and precision health, and the impact of social equity, environmental protection, and responsible sustainability, and finally the opportunities and challenges offered by health paradigm shift on the social front and the engagement of the Arab region with such paradigms. We have a wonderful group of speakers. We will start with Dr. Khalid Rabia, Associate Professor and Associate Chair from the Department of Architecture. This will be followed by Dr. Hassan Fawal, Professor and Chair of the Institute of Global Health and Human Ecology. And finally, we have Dr. Huda Rashad, Research Professor and Director of the Social Research Center. At the end of these three presentations, I would like to come back only for a few minutes to introduce some of the prototypes that have been developed by the American University in Cairo students and researchers, which try to address several challenges in health as well as meet the Sustainable Development Goals of the United Nations. Dr. Khalid Rabi.
Hello everyone, President Galal, welcome to AUC, Provost Abdurrahman, Honorable Trustees, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Khalid Tarabi, Associate Professor of Sustainable Design at the Department of Architecture and the Associate Chair. Very proud to start this off today, and thank you, Dr. Azazi, for the introduction. Okay, so when I was asked to provide a few slides today about this topic, I found it interesting that we're starting with this in the midst of the development that we're currently living in. You can see the signs of this development, fast-growing development every day around AUC. For those who have been here for quite some time, they can quickly notice and witness the changes that actually have touched our fabric surrounding the campus ever since we actually started our operation around 2010. So the title is Going Green in the New Normal and the Challenges, and I basically pose here the challenges from the eyes of the architect, and I end up with few questions for our discussion. So this is the outline where I will speak about global to local challenges, post-COVID impacts on our built environment, sustainability and what the definition is that has been carried over now, and the need for a paradigm shift, and finally end up with a few questions from my point of view for just our discussions. I like to start always with this kind of, I know it's a chart, but it shows where we are, the current level of carbon and versus what we've been actually recorded, and where we bridged the acceptable levels. This coupled with an unprecedented temperature, global temperature that now reached a steady level of 1 degree above. This has been recorded in increasing curves of carbon and greenhouse gas emissions, surface temperature of the planet, an increasing level of carbon dioxide, which when all coupled together, it results in sea level rise that we notice every day. What that means is these charts, they mean that in few decades, if not earlier, and we've been witnessing these signs now, that we will see cities that will actually have large parts of it that will be displaced. This is Alexandria, my hometown. 74% of it, according to NASA, will experience mild and extreme displacement. Miami, USA, 94% will experience displacement. 97% of Amsterdam will experience that displacement, and finally Shanghai, almost 100% should change where they are. A whole city should change where it is, or we should come up with different changes to cope with what's expected. And we can see the signs of that now. Looking at local challenges, we have still experienced what we will do with our existing building stock here in Egypt. How are we going to treat our buildings? How are we going to cope with our buildings, existing buildings? Where to place our roads and networks? It's not by the amount, it's strategically where they should be placed. What are we going to do with our waste? Are we going to continue in the same status quo? Or are we going to find different ways, different possible ways to get this gold in our waste, get this waste to be diverted in different areas other than dump yards? Access to our clean water continue to be the issue. Typical Egyptian family consume 1 cubic meter per day. We are certified now that we are under water poverty levels. And with the challenges regionally that we are facing, we expect this to be even a much, much harder ticket in the future. Continue to have a clash between culture and identity, spurring growth around our heritage sites, cultural sites, and these problems that we face every day and that we observe as architects, what we pride ourselves being the gatekeepers of the environment. Air pollution used to be an issue, now it's an ever fast-growing issue because it's not just pollution, it's pollution and contamination. Informality starts and still takes over parts of our green cover. Our green cover continue to disappear, not just as the agricultural land, but where we live, each and every one of us can see a diminishing part of their green cover that they used to look at ever since they were young. In fact, if you visit your own place where you came from, you will be wondering that you used to live in front of this kind of trees or this kind of park, and it right now disappeared, and it's replaced with a great housing complex or a shopping mall. All of this resulted into flooding conditions, snow sometimes. Okay, as you see here on the right side, dusting in Shuru, Medinti, and New Cairo. And what's the only positive thing about this is our adaptability have grown to these things, that now we are getting used to it. We're getting used to be submerged, that our basements are submerged. So, this is again another dramatic, typical picture now, every winter, in absence of stormwater management or functioning infrastructure. Rapid urbanization continue to eat and continue to take place every day in Egypt to absorb and supply and provide the 500,000 demand of housing that is required every year. What's the form of this rapid urbanization? You might call it urban growth. You might call it the move to reclaim the desert, but it's still urbanization that we know where the direction of it is, getting outside that crowded, crammed city with its poor infrastructure, getting into more of the New Deal. Let me show you a timeline that it will show you some of the history. Can you recognize that site? Yep. This is New Cairo in the year 2000. I will hope that the laser pointer is actually working. It's not. So maybe mine will work better. It's not also. So in the yellow rectangle, this is the area circulating the city of New Cairo when it was first kind of outlined, roads and walkways in the year 2000. Exactly on the left are an exact same cluster in red, and that's for our existing cities. I just want you to focus on In the middle of that, as we see the morphology of the fabric throughout in 20 years, from 2000 to 2020, not the development and the fast-growing development of New Cairo that actually surrounds us and that we were part of it and now we're at the center of it and now it expands all the way up. But I want you to focus on the left, on the diminishing green cover that we used to enjoy and have. In the same time that we had fast development on the right, we had also an equal development on the left, but to eating up our green cover and continuing to decrease what we used to have as an asset. 2001, 2002, 3, skipping through quickly, you can see the changes. Sorry that you have to be looking in 2 areas in the same time. That's how the city grew and continue to grow. We are living in a developed city that continues to grow every day. Now we can see all the residential clusters. Can you recognize where AUC is? Yep. Yep. And AUC up till 2012, the year I was actually hired at AUC, was sort of, I drove around and it was the end of my line. Right. I'm sorry, the laser pointer again is not working, but it's where the main road start to curve around. That's where AUC is. Yeah. Yes. So we see that, and we've been watching this 2013. Now we see development even taking part more, but our eyes has been always on new cities. We have never been really following up what's happening to where we came from, the existing fabric, and the diminishing part of the green, all growing. You can see up top now at 2018, all the way up top, traces of the defense ministry in the new capital. 2019, 2020. So, back again, 2 developed, 1 fully developed, spearheading, fast, and the other is a fast deterioration in our eyes as architects and planners. So, these issues pose an additional challenge for us that we have actually knew that it will happen, and we are sitting there watching with no control. Comes up COVID to add on top of these challenges a heavier challenge, a much more immediate challenge, and to our built environment in terms of what to do with crowd management. And I borrowed here some AUC pictures just so that to tell you what are we involved in with VP Shireen here. We are part of a committee that looks into these things and meets constantly to discuss about what are we going to do, the guidelines, how are we going to manage the crowds, how are we going to keep the social distances. In addition, more utilization of our open space, how can we use the spaces much more where they were not intended to be designed that way. That's the open spaces that were created. And the most important issue, what are we going to do about our HVAC systems? The systems that are responsible for delivering the one thing that is a hot topic right now, the air that we breathe. The burdens on our infrastructure with our new equipment that has to be added to it without getting into the details, a much more complex filtration system, deionization of air, more filters, more ultraviolet, more and more and more that turns our existing systems pre-COVID obsolete. And that there is new design and new systems and new investment that should be directed to taking care of our air in the future. Other challenges, materials, how is it going to work with our sanitization? How is it going to accept this disinfection continuously and repeatedly every day? more water for disinfection in a country starving for water. Larger buildings, should we tell our master planners design larger buildings to house the same population, or should we start to recommend purging out population and decreasing our population to fit into the existing buildings that actually we own and design, because definitely we can't have the same population in the same space anymore. So, I'm sorry, I skipped. Oh. Sorry. Increasing energy use for ventilation. I was just speaking in a meeting this morning, and our need for ventilation and energy have grown tremendously because we have to actually continue to supply our buildings with much, much more fresh air rather than recycled air in all our buildings, not just on AUC, everywhere, globally everywhere. We have issues with acoustics now that we have to manage because we have dual delivery, right, Dr. Aziza, with continue to improve our classrooms. We have technology-driven burdens, more virtual, less face-to-face, and more. All that required us to start to think about a paradigm shift in architectural design, behavior, planning, how we deal with open spaces, how do we deal with our existing buildings, what type of investments should be targeted in priority to our buildings to transition it to this the lasting issue of the pandemics. Will it go away? Will it be a short term and it goes away in few years, fades out? Or are we gonna coexist with that? Much, much more than what we anticipated. Fourth wave, when the first wave came in, they said there would be a second wave and a third wave, like the Spanish pandemic, and now we're in what, like the fifth wave? And the changes? So we need to look into our air quality, welfare institutions, reinvent our communities, reconnect with our healthcare institutions, build for resilience and smart growth, not just growth and real estate development. Introduce the importance of data-driven and transparent communities and design for what the importance of data is to analyze and to give us the proper decisions. Finally, I question a paradigm shift, and I question the framework for sustainable development that we all have learned and we know been invented in 1987 by the Brundtland Report Commission, and the simple definition was it's a development that meets the need of the present without compromising the ability of future generations to meet their own needs. But what is this, how is this statement holding up right after all of these challenges, expected challenges, and sudden challenges? How's that statement? Should we start to rethink the social, economic, and environmental pillars that we all have grown up or learned, that it's the framework for sustainable development that we all aspire for? To conclude, I pose the following three questions. Are we in need of climate change revolution against the status quo that we are comfortable with, against the minimum efforts that we are taking steps to? Are the impacts of our buildings short or long term? It's the commonly used sustainable development definition, sustainable. Thank you.
So, good afternoon, honored guests. Good afternoon, Mr. President, Dr. Ahab, Provost. So, when I was first asked to participate in this panel, and despite the fact that the title of the panel, the Global Health and Human Ecology, mirrors the Institute of Global Health and Human Ecology, it would not do for me just to simply talk about the Institute. Okay, so I will actually be talking about much of the wonderful talent, including what Dr. Tarabia touched upon in a few moments. So, this is from the cover of the October 7th Economist, and it actually shows the fate of our planet if we do not address the issues of climate change and global warming. And it's a very interesting and very timely topic. One of the things that I find very gratifying about my colleague's presentation is we actually did not coordinate presentations. And so the overlap is actually shows that some minds are on the same page. So, west coast of the United States, Australia, Turkey, Greece, Greenland, the Arctic, Antarctica. Okay. The UK, Germany, Belgium, Puerto Rico, that suffered this 2 years ago and still hasn't cleaned up. The Gulf of Mexico, Mexico, Sri Lanka, India. The Amazon, under the current regime, Central Africa, and deforestation. Death Valley, Sudan, Ethiopia, Central Africa, Afghanistan, the Middle East at large. The creation of what currently we call climate refugees, and were known as environmental refugees, with all the implications as migrants move from one area to another, and how they encroach on the environment, but also the geopolitical picture. And among these refugees are species that are being pushed to extinction and starvation, leading to extinction. These are the records for July 2021 for some of the hottest temperatures on record across our globe. Now, it's very difficult for anyone to say that climate change is not a health issue. And here I emphasize health. I don't just emphasize medicine. I emphasize health, the overarching umbrella. And so for anyone who likes to cook or bake, you probably know the one thing that you don't want to do when something's hot out of the oven and steaming is to cover it. Because with that steam that's rising, and in the case of our globe, the pollutants that are rising, obviously are going to condense and come down. And what goes up does indeed come down. And that is essentially what is actually happening and has been happening over this last century to our planet. I hearken back to a publication, what is considered the first publication to the lay person in 1989, authored by Bill McKibben. And if the waves crash up against the beach, eroding dunes and destroying homes, it is not the awesome power of Mother Nature. It is the awesome power of Mother Nature as altered by the awesome power of man, who has overpowered in a century the processes that have been slowly evolving and changing of their own accord since the earth was born. So this was in 1989. We fast forward to September 2020, where in the General Assembly, Antonio Gutierrez says, "I am sounding the alarm." And part of that alarm was an indictment of vaccination inequity, the many military coups and geopolitical disturbances that are occurring, but most notably, the climate emergency. Fast forward to the National Academy of Medicine, whose president, Victor Dow, basically claims that the biggest challenges we have are COVID-19, climate change, and systemic racism, however you want to define racism. So, let me start off by talking about the encroachment. Part of the consequences of population growth, climate change, and human activity and emerging environmental or climate refugees is the encroachment on our biodiversity and other habitats. Part of that leads to extinction. Part of that brings us into contact with species we normally would not. We may drive them to extinction. We may share with them some of the pathogens that cause human disease. They, in return, may share mutations with these. And so, just as we studied the simian immunodeficiency virus when we were studying HIV, we now have an emergence of the COVID-19 virus. This probably has become the most familiar illustration in our globe, and it has become the global challenge. I would like to say that it has been a blessing in disguise, given how it has motivated so many events in terms of cooperation. I would like to say it is a blessing in disguise in that it motivated faculty like Anwar Abdul Nasser to work with undergraduate students on intellectual property that was awarded first place at an MIT conference, or that it stimulated the American University in Cairo to launch several grants opportunity to meet the challenges, some of them awarded to our faculty in this room, or how it stimulated the ability of some to investigate the neurological fallout and the mental health fallout of some of these activities, like the ongoing study, and the role of vitamin D deficiency as a risk factor in COVID-19 neurologicals, or the modeling of the target receptor, or work done by a faculty who recently joined us, Dr. Samsud Chun, on the mental fallout of lockdown. It is in that avenue that we also have investigated the possibility of launching our own ability at AUC to monitor the presence of COVID-19, which does make its way into wastewater, as well as to monitor possible staff, something we're ready to go. It is also the opportunity to voice our gratitude to our psychology department and our wellness office in meeting the challenge of our students and faculty in addressing stress, or in how our faculty, like Dr. Azazi, have worked collaboratively to try to develop new therapeutic, or how a faculty in physics works, like Muhammad Swalam, works to develop opportunities for early detection, or how Ahmed Mustafa of the biology department took the opportunity to see whether there's a rapid diagnostic using a blood test versus the very invasive nasopharyngeal probing that so many of us who travel or need to be tested confront. But as a pandemic, it brought our attention together, and we hear about it every day. But is that really the challenges of our low and middle income countries? According to the World Health Organization, It is that 25% of all diseases in developing countries is due to environmental factors, that it is non-communicable diseases like heart disease and stroke and diabetes and cancer and chronic respiratory disease as posed by the pollution factor, which is aggravated by climate change, that is a true threat. Or that this is probably one of the greatest factors that impairs our economic development in the developing world, particularly since it contributes to poverty. Or that 80% of all deaths worldwide, occur due to non-communicable diseases occur in developing countries. Most notably, by the way, among women and children, due to burning biomass and indoor air pollution, where on average 4.5 million people die every year. Or that people in the developing world die from non-communicable diseases at a younger age than 60. This is the future, and yet they are at risk. So, the question of equity and gender equity will be dealt with my colleague. So, the question of energy and air. This actually brought back memories of work done in the 80s and 90s by myself and others due to exposure to ozone, acid sulfate, acid nitrates, volatile organic compounds, and heavy metals, most notably ultrafine heavy metals, which gave rise to the field of nanotoxicology. And so studies have actually shown you would never actually have thought that air pollution would be a factor for the development of type 2 diabetes or the development of Alzheimer's disease or Parkinson's disease. We know of the respiratory effects. We know that it contributes to the development of chronic obstructive pulmonary disease, emphysema, and asthma. We know that at the nanoscale, some of these factors like nickel, which surprisingly enough in its salt form does not invade the brain, at nanoparticle scale it does. And we know that as we rush in adopting new technology, we need to have a dialogue about safety and learn from our past, something that we often neglect. Here at AUC, and working with Dr. Tarabia, we've also partially met some of that challenge. As you walk around campus on the roof side, you will actually see that we have several air monitoring stations. But we have faculty who work on alternatives, whether it is our colleagues in physics, like the group headed by Dr. Nega Hallam or Muhammad Swalam, or our faculty like Aman Al-Asawi in mechanical engineering, or whether it is Dr. Muhammad Mursi or Dr. Amr Sarag who address alternatives. It is also our material science group, such as Dr. Hanadi Salim and Dr. Nega Hallam, or Dr. Ihab himself, who once tried to explain to me thermoacoustics and how thermoacoustics could be used to power a refrigerator, okay? To some extent, that was way over my head. And how people in environmental engineering like Ahmed Gindi closely collaborate with people at Surrey University to actually address some of these alternative solutions. There's also the question of water, and this is the dwindling green ribbon that people use in satellites to identify Egypt. And if you have the time, you can do a comparative study going back 20 years to see how that ribbon is slowly thinning out. We have problems of sanitation and the microflora, the bacteria and other parasites within that water. We have toxic precipitation due to air pollution. We have drainage runoff of sewage and pesticides. We have industrial waste and fertilizers, which raises the nutrient levels in water, and so you have algal blooms that forbid the people in Sri Lanka or in Florida or in Canada from eating the shellfish because it contains toxic organisms. And we have, of course, the question of pesticides. Dr. Hani Sweden, Dr. Anwar Abdel Nasser, okay, and I'm the one who actually changed and made the sites anonymous for some reason, okay, have been looking at water quality, have been looking at food quality and the nutrient value in different fish farms as well as different locations across Egypt. The story is not a pretty one, okay? I have been working and taking a look at communities that live on fish and shown that many of the contaminants, including mercury, as well as PCBs, how they impact on children fed on a diet of seafood, and how fetal exposure to many of these contaminants may predispose an individual to developing such disorders as Alzheimer's disease. But we have people in physics who are developing biosensors, like Dr. Nagah Allam's group, people in chemistry who are looking at remediation, like Tamer Al-Idrisi and our very own Adham Ramadan. We have people like Sonia Zulfikar who are also looking at remedial solutions, and we have Dr. Ahmed Al-Gindi who educated me that 88% of our rural communities do not have adequate sanitation and has developed a zero-energy compact unit that can serve a small village of 100 individuals. We have people like Tamer Shoaib who identify some of the risks in our water. And if you take a look at the March 2021, and I'm sure you'll hear this from Dr. Azazi, you have how he's working on a detection and remedial system to guarantee water security. There's also the question of land use practices and nutrition. So one of the consequences is over-irrigation. 80% of the water used for irrigation in Egypt and countries like Egypt is actually wasted, okay? It's in excess. There's a lack of proper waste management. There's the use of synthetic fertilizers to compensate for soil that is headed towards desertification. There's the excessive use of pesticides, many of which are not registered. There's fouling the nest, a term toxicologists use when dad and mom come from work and don't change their clothes, or their clothes get dumped in the laundry along with their kids. You're messing up your own nest. And there's the diminished nutrient value that we find in our food, as well as the social stressors with meeting economic need. So work by myself and work by Dr. Salama has identified the impact of some of these chemicals on nervous system development, tied in with what we call polymorphisms or changes in genes, as well as deficiencies in vitamin D, both on effect in the cardiovascular system as well as the nervous system. We have people who are addressing the question of obesity, because the diets that we think are nutritious, when you have them all filled with every fast food chain on the face of the globe, is definitely a detrimental one. We have people like Dr. Fayrouz Ashur, who joined us this fall, who specialize on both spectrums of children and stunted growth and nutrition, as well as the elderly. And we have talents that monitor the quality of the dust that we drum up from agriculture, like Dr. Tamer Shoaib, as well as Dr. Ahmed Gindi.
You cannot talk about sustainability, you cannot talk about environmental remediation without talking about Dr. Salah Hagar of the Mechanical Engineering Department. And that first book, by the way, Sustainability and Innovation, was co-authored by the previous president, Dr. Lisa Anderson. These books are readily available. I would encourage people to take a look at them. Now, some people see a tail, some people see a trunk. What I see is an elephant. And that elephant, or the elephant of our planet, requires that we take a holistic approach. So one holistic approach is that our Center of Applied Research on the Environment and Sustainability, or CARES, directed by Dr. Swalem, is tackling the question of the water, energy, food nexus towards security. And in this scenario, desalination plays a very big part. That desalinated water, which in many cases may also be groundwater, is actually used to raise fish. Fish, of course, if you eat, you produce waste. That waste, of course, is fertilizer, and that water containing fertilizer can be grown by plants hydroponically. That is subsystem B. But you're left with this brine. Brine is very high in its salt content. Brine, currently in desalination practices, is either dumped back into the sea, i.e. it's a pollutant, or it is injected back into the groundwater, which defeats the whole purpose of having desalinated anything, because once again it's a pollutant. So one of the things that CARES is doing in this model is trying to grow food. Food for more fish, or food to grow shrimp. And the little culprit, target, Arsenia in the middle, okay, loves to grow in high salinity. It is not a native of Egypt, but we on this campus, and if you get an opportunity, please visit CARES, okay, which does some very amazing things, okay? This is taking a holistic approach towards energy security, food security, water security. Another holistic approach is to define risk. To this day, as long as we have been studying many, many diseases, and as long as we have been identifying genes, there is no one single gene, there is no one single target for any of the diseases. In the realm of neurodegenerative diseases, something Dr. Salam and myself, as well as Dr. Doa, are interested in. We're interested, and because we're learning from history, in the sum total of everything you've actually been exposed to, okay? Exposure here is not just chemical or biological. Exposure is also the stress, your socioeconomic status, your demographics, where do you live, where you went to school, how you were treated, okay? And towards this goal, we have actually launched a study that is supported by the Technical University of Munich, as well as DAD, the German Exchange Cooperative, to take a look at aging. It is modeled after successful longitudinal studies like TILDA, okay, which is the Irish study, which has informed Parliament, or SHARE, that of the European Union. And it was actually launched in this very room in February 2nd, 2020. That study that we currently are carrying out is called the Eastern Mediterranean Aging Study. Now, I said we are carrying it out because we are carrying it out with partners. And one great partner that will be speaking right after me is Dr. Huda Rashad and our colleagues in the Social Research Center. Because you talk about sustainability. Part of the sustainability model, or a successful sustainability model, regardless of how you define it, is to have that continuity, and that continuity will only take place not just by educating the new generation, but by cooperation among like-minded people. Thank you, Dr. Hood. Okay, so what's this exposome? I said the sum total of everything. So this exposome, and there are only 5 centers in the whole world, by the way, that do the big data analysis. I believe you will be hearing about big data analysis and artificial intelligence in the 3rd panel, just as you will be hearing about the refugees and the challenges in our next panel. So, what is the exposome? It is the external environment in its totality, with its interaction with your internal environment, with its totality, to try to determine health outcome. It is very gratifying to see that AUC, subscribes to this, in that we obtained funding from Bartlett Fund. And towards this, there are several studies that are ongoing. So, I want to cut to the chase, because I'm told the time is very short. And we're back to the SDGs. From a health focus, every single one of these SDGs is actually has a health focus. It is not separate from the quality of water or poverty or stunted growth. The question is, given the challenges, do we spend the next 9 years working at saving these SDGs, or are we tossing them out? So in being invited to this, what do you give a new president who comes on board? I decided that I would share a point of view, of what I saw 5 years ago in coming to AUC. AUC undoubtedly is a treasure trove of intellectual and practical talent. People talk about being the sky's the limit. Well, the sky's not the limit, if it is our job to clear that polluted sky. That being said, thank you very much for your attention.
Okay, maybe I'll start till you put my presentation. First, good afternoon. Welcome. Ahlan wa sahlan. We're very happy to have you with us. As you see, what's common in this panel is that all of us are concerned with sustainable development. All of us are seeking well-being. We are seeking health. And when I say health, I don't mean disease, absence of disease. I think of health in its totality in terms of social health, satisfaction of potentials, living the life that we all value. So all of us are together in this. And the previous speakers emphasized certain determinants of ill health, the climate change, the environment, and so on. And there are many entry points. Each one of us enter the forces of change in their own way, but they're not silos. And like what Dr. Hassan was saying, the elephant, we have to work together, and we have to enter those different entry points and realize that they complement each other. I'm not focused on the determinants of well-being. My focus here is on the type of action, not the actions itself, whether you're working on environment or pollution, or you're working on the social aspect. I'm talking about how we do the actions. And I'm very interested in the actors, the responsibility of key actors, and how to hold the key actors accountable for the realization of the aspiration of well-being and sustainable development. In order to do that, I will divide my talk into 3 separate sections. In the first part, I will talk about how the health field and the development field are approaching this question of the realization of sustainable development. I'll touch on the Arab region very briefly, how we are dealing with those kind of ideas and framing, and more briefly on the social science contribution because of the time. So in terms of the global health and the development paradigm, there are changes. And when we talk about shifts in paradigm, what I mean, the recent way of thinking about the health, the development from the development field and from the health field. in terms of the key messages that I want you to keep in mind, so that's the end of my talk. The first is that what is happening currently in the area of trying to find sustained solution, in the area of policy reforms, are not fully benefiting from the different way of approaching the issue. So the recent shifts that are in the health paradigm in particular have not sort of been capitalized on. That's my first message, and it's the first part of the talk. My second message, in terms of the Arab region efforts, we are all seeing lots of efforts. I mean, our leaders and our policymakers are really striving to improve the situation. But my take on it is that those efforts are not succeeding in building back fairer. And the term fairer is very important in the discourse. The third message that relates to social science contribution in general, I think the message, you know it already in a way, is that the weakest link in our contribution is our ability to impact policy. And I will touch on that as well. All of these are negative messages. However, I really would like to couch them in a kind of a hope game. I think there are things to be done, and I think there are opportunities to do certain things. So let's start with the first part, which is the determinant of health. I don't have those very fancy photos, but and I don't want you to dwell a lot on this sort of graph, but this is the framing. This is the way we are thinking how health is produced. At the very far end, the result is the health and well-being of people. But what are the determinants of health and well-being of people? We know what are the determinants, and we have known it for a very long time. This is nothing new here, and it's common sense. The very close determinants are the way we behave, the close determinants, our genetic predisposition, the context we live in, the usual terminology of social determinants. This affects our health directly. However, these kind of forces, they do lend themselves to something much more distal. Something is happening here, I don't know what. They do lend themselves to more distal social and economic determinants. So this whole kind of way of thinking of health, of well-being, I'm talking about disease, of development actually, is well known, and it has been understood. If you talk to anyone and you tell him there are biological reasons for health, he knows. Tell him it's not just that, there are social determinants. Yes, of course, they know. It's the social policies that affect the social determinants. Yes, we know. So that kind of thinking is nothing new in it. However, it's the type of actions we choose to adopt to reach improved health. What happened is we looked at this big kind of framework, and we looked at the far end, and we said, if we want to change health, why don't we just get technological advances? Those are magic bullets. When you have a cure for a disease, when you have a vaccination, those make a big difference. They're very important. So it's very quick to achieve improvement in health by focusing on the science of technology, which I agree, of course. The other way to achieve health is to understand that also there are behavior and there are social constraints. So what you can do is focus on the behavior. Go to the behavior and change the behavior. Unfortunately, the simplistic way of thinking that you can change behavior without really changing the context doesn't work, but something happens. So we do that. So our way of action with this understanding was to choose the priority action and the ones that are likely to do short-term results. What about the distal determinants, the policies and the social and the economic? Well, the health sector were doing their bit, the medical model, this is what they can do, and they left the social development to the other sectors, the social sectors, and the social sectors always try to improve the situation. But the problem with the social sectors is that When they worked on the social policies and whatever, they said, this requires resources. If you want to improve education, if you want to improve transportation, we are a poor country. So we're working within limited resources. So the mindset is, yes, we understand. Yes, we're going to change policies, but also you have to understand it's not easy because we don't have resources to do this quality education for everyone. In addition, it takes a long time, and people cannot wait. I mean, people are particularly in a disease thinking. People want quick results. They're sick. They want the technology. They want the medicine. So that's the frame that always existed and was dominant all the time. What is different nowadays? Oh, and I also forget, we were worried about the inequality of health. So while we were acting on health, we were looking at the poorest of the poorest. We're looking at the weakest, at women, at children who are in vulnerable condition. So we also recognize there are inequality, and we also recognize we have to do an extra effort for the disadvantaged. Fine, that's the dominant framing. What is being changing nowadays? The key change that happened is that people started to talk about inequities, not inequalities. But what's the difference? The difference is that inequities are not just measuring inequalities, they are saying that these inequalities are caused by unfair actions. They're not just a manifestation of the social composition or social behavior. There is someone to blame for those inequalities. They are the unfair actions. And the unfair action starts from the very end, the beginning. So basically, the key change is that we are more worried about the inequalities, but we were worried about them feeling that those are not the usual social manifestation of the composition of society. No, they are caused by bad actions. They are caused by bad politics. They are caused by poor social arrangements. So you're blaming something for what you're saying. So that's the key change, the framing. Once this frame is adopted, all of a sudden, while no one is questioning the importance of improving livelihoods for target groups, no one is questioning the importance of technological advances. These are important entry points, and if this is all we can do, let's do them. But this doesn't solve your problem. What solves your problem is to go to the causes of the causes. What solves your problem is you try to change the social structure in society. You start to think of policies that can impact the social distribution of people, policies that can impact the environmental distribution of risks. This is what will make sustained changes at the very end. So just not to take a very long time, let me sort of summarize the features in the recent health paradigm. First, we're talking about equity, not inequality. And the equity means unjust causes producing the inequality distribution. That's what is the implication of that? The first implication is that when you approach the disadvantaged, rather than approaching them in a welfare state of mind, those are poor and they're suffering and I have to help them because this is a human right, health is a human right, you approach them from an ethical imperative. You have caused this, so you have to work twice as hard to improve this. Moreover, because this is inequities, we started to understand, and we've seen it in our region actually, the consequences of not acting. All of the not all, part of the disruptions, the extremism, the fanatism, the marginalization, people unhappiness, part of it is contributed by the unfairness in our society. The unfairness. Fair societies produce healthy, healthy societies, healthy population, the social cohesion of our society. So you understand the urgency of action. The second point of the change, you talk explicitly about the responsibility of upstream structural forces. And I quote from a publication. It doesn't tell you that people are unhealthy because they eat unhealthy food. It tells you people are unhealthy because of unfair policies, bad politics, and poor social arrangement. And it shows by evidence that this are killing people at a large scale. The third major change, our whole understanding of the term, because social determinants of health, everybody says social determinants of health. But what they mean when they talk about social determinants of health in their mind, the level of education, the poverty, this is not the social determinant of health that the new paradigm is thinking of. The social determinants of health, the way we define it now, are the structural forces that are producing unfair social stratifications, that producing that distribution. And all of a sudden, when I speak of social determinants, yes, of course, education distribution is social determinants. Poverty is a social determinants, of course. But power is a social determinants. The feeling of marginalization, the distribution of voices in the society is social determinant. People who are not part of the society, they are suffering. Their well-being, they cannot be healthy. And maybe they don't have cancer, but they are unhappy. They're unwell. So that's the key features in the new paradigm. And quickly, because I'm worried about the time, what does this feature mean? And I told you I'm talking about the action. The first is that you have to go to the causes of the causes. Act on different level, different entry point, but let's talk about macro policies. Let's talk about external factors as well, because this is also, it has a huge impact on what's happening. And I put here a statement by Desmond Tutu, but there are many similar statements in that you have to work on the structural forces. All of a sudden, I'm not talking about effective governments. I'm not talking about cost-effective sectors. I am talking about good governance. I'm talking the way the governance is shaped by value. I want the governance model that we adopt in our region. The first thing they ask themselves when they adopt a policy, when they do a new intervention, how fair is it? Fairness is a pillar, and it has to be part and parcel of everything we do. So leadership commitment to fairness is for me good governance. Accountability, there are lots of elements of pillars of government, but fairness is a crucial one. The third, like the elephant, but the elephant is not the different people, it's the whole of government. When the government is composed of sectors. Each sector has its own goal, but well-being is a fundamental result of the goal of the sector. So when I'm going to evaluate the sector, I'm not just going to evaluate what they do, whether education has improved or not. I'm going to evaluate whether the fundamental result in terms of improving the well-being of people has happened or not. And all of them are responsible together on the outcome. And then there are terms, we talk about health in all policies, and people think of it as this is the health sector. No, it's well-being in all policies. Every policy should be held accountable on its impact on well-being. And we start to talk about distributive justice, proportional universalism, and so on. The problem with those terms, they invoke ideological, they think, I'm not ideological wide, I'm not one that's talking about communism and whatever. This is not what we're saying. Each society has a social composition. There are differences between groups, and those differences are brought about by agency, by effort, by individual initiative. We accept those differences. The difference that we don't accept is the difference that came about because our unfair policies. So we're not talking about distribution of outcomes. I'm not talking about taking from the rich and giving to the poor. I'm not talking about that. I'm not talking about in health and well-being promotion, I want to promote the well-being of the well-off, but I want also the distribution of well-being to be fair. So it's not it's a redistribution of fair opportunities, not of the end outcome. We all have fair opportunity, level game, and so on. Finally, which doesn't happen at all, and it should happen in the type of action, when we measure the inequality in well-being, this is not a public health measure. This is a performance measure of social success. It's a benchmark of our society. It speaks to sustainable development. So we should be seeking equality in well-being, or we should be seeking to get rid of unfair inequalities in well-being. Now we get to the Ministry of Health. What can the Ministry of Health do? I mean, the Ministry of Health are inundated with health care. And we would talk about health well-being, we look at them. However, they have a certain responsibility, which we call a stewardship role of Ministry of Health. Yes, I recognize Ministry of Health are not the actor on the other social sector, but they should be a purveyor of a wider set of social norms. They should talk about the unfairness affecting the health of people. So they should advocate, they should partner with other sectors, and they should show leadership, but they're not the only player. I mean, this thing is always bothering me. Who should be the core body responsible for that type of change? Is it maybe the Ministry of Planning? We don't have a Ministry of Development. We have of social development, but it's really about the poor more than the vision of development. Quickly, before Dr. Hassan tells me to stop. This is happening in the health field, and it's happening very strongly, very significantly. The problem is, in the development field, they're not moving consistently with this kind of thinking. In the development field, the SDGs that everybody showed is the most powerful manifestation of the thinking in the development field. And the way the development field is thinking, well-being, they have a goal, health and well-being for all. For them, well-being is a sectoral goal. For me and for Dr. Hassan, when he put his figure, well-being in the heart. All the goals should all work together and should be accountable for what they do to the well-being of the society. So my problem with the discourse on the development currently, it has done wonderful. I mean, there are lots of wonderful things happening, but they are failing on certain fronts. They are failing to push health equity as a central goal and impact measure. When our president recently announced the Human Development Report of Egypt, and he was so happy with the actions and so on, nobody was talking about, okay, what's happening in terms of how people are living? What is the well-being? What is the distribution of well-being? The other thing is the way it approaches inequality, it still approaches inequality not anchored on an ethical imperative. It's still anchored on a compassionate model. And when it's a compassionate model, there is a big difference in the way you do things from an ethical imperative model. We are not challenging the unfairness of action on policy. Enough. There are some voices. You shouldn't be doing that because this is not affecting others, but we're not doing it properly. And we have not yet moved from the narrow targeting of disadvantaged groups to a transformative distribution of disadvantage. And this applies to every field, by the way, to the climate change, to the environment, to the social. It's not what you're working on, it's how you approach it. Quickly to the Arab region. In the Arab region, we're all aware of the crisis mode we are in. So many of our countries cannot even start to think of the development models. But maybe we should reflect how much this crisis mode can be blamed for the unfairness, the previous unfairness. Did we have enough social immunization to stop this crisis mode we are in? And again, I'm not saying this is the only contributor. There are many other contributors, and we should not start about the external contributors and so on. But at least within our house, I think we're suffering from the lack of social immunization, and I mean by that, we're suffering from the lack of fairness in our society that didn't treat individuals as equal citizens. Again, what we're missing is that when we produce our reports on the development goals, we don't touch at all on the well-being and equity. Some leaders are talking about it's the duty of government to ensure those well-being. Actually, since a long time, Aristotle was talking about that. He was just saying, I'm saying in Arabic, الترتيبات الاجتماعية مسؤوليتها هي خدمة الإنسان والمواطن. I mean, these are not new thinking. It's just they did not manifest themselves in the way we do things. Finally, what we're seeing a Ministry of Health quite weak, under-resourced, overwhelmed. So we're asking her to do a stewardship role. I mean, it's so difficult. And we have to think of how to do it. And the most important point in my mind is the lack of accountability. And the lack of accountability is not just that the system doesn't encourage that. From a researcher perspective, it's we don't have the data to hold anyone accountable for. I mean, even in health, we have what we call health information system. We are now having a major grant. I'm talking about SRC, where I belong, from the IDRC in Canada, to move the package of indicators from health information system to an information system for health. The information system for health doesn't follow the disease model. It brings the other player in. We have not used the SDG, which has such high political leverage, and we all signed on it, the Arab region. We have not used it as a critical self-assessment of the development vision. We have not used it to mainstream equity. We have not even used it to encourage wider participation of the society. Nobody knows about SDGs except us, the ones who read and the intellectuals. But I'm talking about the community and their call for the SDGs, of course, is absent, or their participation. In terms of social science, there are many advances, and I don't have the time to cover them, but there are lots of changes happening in the way we conduct our research and with the way we produce our reports. I was just going to show you that to prove that some of our work, and you don't have to read that at all, but you have to look at the red. This red are warning signals. It tells you there are inequitable distribution of whatever, adolescent childbearing, of infant mortality, whatever, I mean, the dimension we're looking at. We have produced evidence to demonstrate the severity of inequity in our society. We have even contributed, members of SRC have contributed to international reports. Those two reports we are contributor to, and those reports have received resolutions at the World Health Assembly of saying how we should do things different. There are other international reports. So in terms of contributing to engaging with international literature, yes, there are some effort. Noting that I'm talking about us, but I'm talking about the whole research, the academia, the social science community. We do some capacity support. We try to inform public demand, and I can give example. But policy support, if they ask us to support them, we can help them. Policy impact, this is the big problem. And I'm not going to talk about the usual culprit of resource constraints and capacities. I'm talking about a hostile environment to social science contribution. I'm talking about lack of accountability structures. I'm talking about absence of data information system. I'm almost finished. The hope, a few minutes on the hope. All of this speaks to the problems. So what is the hope element in all this talk? The hope element is that the term equity now is really at the forefront. Everybody is talking about equity. Some of them do not fully understand what we mean by equity, but at least the term has moved to the epicenter. The tolerance of inequality, not the severity, the acceptance of inequalities has diminished, and it has diminished across all development sectors. Even the World Bank is talking about inequality and inequities and so on. In terms of putting health as a goal, it has moved. Again, health, I mean well-being. And I was going to talk about COVID has helped us a little in this regard, but maybe in the discussion we can touch on that. In terms of the social determinants of health equity, there are lots of strategies. The environment in particular has moved. Environment has done well in terms of embracing this new thinking. The NCD, the non-communicable disease strategy, because it was done internationally, it has some elements of that. But I'll give you a story, and before I conclude and stop. This is a hearsay. But they were talking about the Norwegian Foreign Minister of Health. He was attending a high-level meeting. And he was saying in the meeting, I am the health minister. And everybody in my cabinet is the health minister. A few weeks later, he became the health minister. Nowadays, he's the prime minister. So everybody is really watching him. Now that you're prime minister and now that you're sort of embracing this paradigm shift, let's see what are the changes in your policies. I think I said that more or less. I want to quote from the King of Morocco recent speech. He said, Morocco has made significant progress, recognized worldwide. So each country in the Arab region can stand here and boast that there are positive changes happening. And they should do that. But what I very much like about this speech of the King of Morocco, he said the national development model proves today to be unable of meeting the pressing demands and growing needs of citizens, of reducing categorical disparities and territorial differences, and to achieve social justice. This is the critical, and I think, Dr. Khalid, you mentioned the same statement in a different way. It's our development approach, our development model, our vision. This has to drastically change. And I'll stop here, and thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Hoda and Dr. Hassan, Dr. Khalid, for this wonderful presentation. I think we'll start taking any questions from the audience. If not, I can start by asking questions myself. Yes, please. A microphone.
And so now it's a nightmare, right? First of all, they're building more on their fertile land, and the buildings are completely hideous, not completed, et cetera. Can you, the gossip we heard 3 decades ago was that if a building was finished, then it was taxed, so no one finished their buildings. Then a couple of years ago, I think the president said he wanted all the buildings whitewashed so that at least they looked nice. Is this policy? Is this lack of regulation? Is this people being paid off? Is informality another word for total policy failure? I know it's probably very complicated, but is there a way that you can, kind of in a concise way, tell a Martian coming down from Mars, seeing this crazy thing, what are the root causes of they're very, very smart people thinking about planning, but what are the root causes of this disaster of people building on their fertile land, building really hideous buildings, building buildings that are difficult to live in, and that threaten the lifeblood of the tourist economy? So it's a very short question.
Thank you. It's a very loaded question, but briefly, for the interest of time, it's kind of the what we actually debate on and talk about every day and even observe. Why are we doing what we're doing? Why these buildings look like what they are? Why we don't have really good architecture and at least visually pleasing, kind of aesthetically looking buildings. It's so simple that it's market economics still control first cost of our building structures, in addition to a very weak kind of code and legislation regulations. So following up code, the ability to audit, the ability to prevent, stop that illegal work. The government has been doing very successful work in demolishing the illegal, but it's the problem with allowing it in the first place, but has been recently an unbelievable energy in correcting the path. Still, the problem is what's the quality of these buildings? Are they healthy buildings? Do they allow daylight? Simply as a human right of a shelter. We still have many questions to answer, and there are many good attempts led by AUC and led by other institutions to correct this or to suggest ideas of how we can actually advance this to much more better stock. And that's why I spoke about the issue of the existing building stock. We're so much focused about new development, new real estate development, reclaiming desert, but we're still in need of looking at our existing buildings and how are we going to deal with them to transition them to where we are today. I hope I answered the question. I know maybe partially.
I think actually we have been asked to conclude our panel because the floor needs to be ready for the following one. So thanks so much for our panelists and for our audience, and thanks so much for attending. Thank you.